The boy was in the kitchen when James realized he wasn't alone that night. The sound of children's laughter, muffled, out of place, traveled through the hallway like a whisper out of time. He frowned, pulling the glass of whiskey away from his mouth before the door opened with two sharp knocks. "Mr. James!" Sarah's trembling voice appeared at the entrance. She didn't cross the threshold. She just stood there, her face half in shadow, her green eyes pleading for some compassion. The subway stopped running. The streets are impassable. I tried all the apps, but nobody is answering. And Tommy is with me. James kept his gaze fixed on her. He didn't ask what her son was doing there. He didn't ask why she hadn't warned him beforehand. He only felt the bitter taste of memory. Another child, another night, another absence. "And what do you expect me to do?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. Sarah took a hesitant step, clutching her bag strap tightly. "I just need shelter until tomorrow morning. We can sleep in the guest room. Before you wake up, we'll be gone. I promise." James turned slowly. The reflection in the glass showed a man too alone to want company, especially that of a child. But the world outside was falling apart, and whatever she represented was already inside the house. "Where is the boy?" he murmured, tired. "In the kitchen. Mrs. Wilson is giving him a snack." The sound of childish laughter returned, clearer now. James closed his eyes. For a moment, when he opened them, he spoke without turning. "Stay, but keep away from my floor." Sarah nodded, relieved. She was about to leave when he stopped her with a comment that even he didn't know where it came from. "And Sarah, if you need anything, I'll be here in the study." After Sarah left, James poured himself another whiskey, trying to understand why he had given in so easily. Something in her look, perhaps the mixture of pride and vulnerability, had touched a point he thought had been dormant for a long time. 2 hours later, while working on his laptop, James heard a noise coming from the hallway. Opening the door of his study, he found a skinny boy of about 8 years old, with carefully combed blonde hair and curious blue eyes, standing in front of the bookshelf. "What are you doing here?" asked James, trying to soften the authoritative tone he normally used. The boy turned, showing no fear. "I'm looking for something to read. I can't sleep with the sound of the rain." James observed the boy for a few moments. There was something familiar about those intelligent eyes that watched him without hesitation. "What's your name?" "Tommy Wilson, sir. You have a chessboard there." He pointed to a decorative piece on the shelf. "Do you play?" The question caught James off guard. The old marble board had been a gift from his father many years ago. It had been a long time since he'd used it. "I used to play," he answered dryly. The boy's face lit up. "My teacher at school taught me some moves. I might not be very good yet, but I learned quickly." Something about the simplicity of that moment made James feel a lump in his throat. The way Tommy looked at the board reminded him of himself as a child, fascinated by the game his father had taught him on Sunday afternoons in the Hamptons. "It's late for games," said James, checking his watch. But seeing the disappointment in the boy's eyes, he added, "Maybe tomorrow, if it keeps raining." That's when Sarah appeared in the hallway, visibly concerned. "Tommy, what are you doing out of bed?" She quickly approached, placing protective hands on her son's shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mr. James. He shouldn't be bothering you." "He's not bothering me," James replied, surprising himself for the second time that night. "He just wanted something to read." Sarah looked at her son with a mixture of affection and disapproval. "Even so, it's late. Come, Tommy." As he watched mother and son walk away down the hallway, James felt something strange. A feeling of emptiness that he had ignored for so long now seemed more evident. The mansion suddenly seemed too big, too silent, despite the storm raging outside. That night, lying in his king-size bed in the master bedroom, James stayed awake for hours, listening to the thunder and thinking about the small, blue-eyed intruder who had mentioned chess. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember when he had taught his daughter Emily to play, before the divorce and legal battles destroyed any possibility of a relationship between them. James Reynolds had not been born at the top. The son of a small contractor from upstate New York, he had built his empire with relentless determination and some decisions he preferred not to remember. At 45, his name was synonymous with success in the American real estate market, with developments scattered from Seattle to Miami. He woke up early, as usual. The digital clock on the bedside table read 8:30 when his blue eyes opened. The storm had diminished, but it was still raining moderately. He dressed for his morning run, but as he passed through the hallway, he remembered his unexpected guests. For a moment, he hesitated in front of the guest room door. It was strange to have other people in his house. Since the divorce, 7 years ago, James had transformed the mansion into his private refuge. Only employees came and went, always maintaining the discretion he demanded. Sarah had worked for him for 2 years. James had hired her after receiving several recommendations, but they rarely exchanged more than the necessary words. She arrived at 7 and left at 5, Monday through Friday. Efficient and discreet, she was exactly what he was looking for. Until that stormy night, James had never thought of her as anything beyond a competent employee. In the kitchen, to his surprise, he found the boy sitting at the table, drawing in a notebook. "Good morning," said Tommy, looking up from his drawing. "Mom said we shouldn't wake you, but I always wake up early." James poured himself coffee, observing the boy with curiosity. "Is your mother still sleeping?" "No, sir. She's tidying the room and folding the towels we used. She said we need to leave everything as we found it." There was something in the boy's frankness that disarmed James. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have that young, curious presence in his life daily. Emily was about the same age as Tommy when the divorce happened. Now, at 15, she refused to take his calls or respond to his messages. Have you ever felt that strange sensation when someone you barely know awakens feelings you believed were dormant? How would you react if you were in James's place, seeing in Tommy a reflection of what his relationship with his own daughter could have been? "Do you work a lot?" asked Tommy, interrupting his thoughts. James blinked, returning to the present. "Yes, quite a bit. My mom, too. She works here and then still does cleaning in other places on weekends. That's why I stay with Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor. But she's sick, so I came with Mom yesterday." The simplicity with which the boy described his mother's exhausting routine made James feel uncomfortable. He had never considered that Sarah might have other jobs besides working in his house. At that moment, Sarah entered the kitchen, stopping abruptly upon seeing James talking with her son. "Good morning, Mr. James," she said, nervously adjusting the simple blouse she wore. Without the uniform she wore during work, Sarah looked different. Younger, perhaps. Her blonde hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that James had never really observed before. "Good morning, Sarah," he replied, surprising himself with the milder tone of his own voice. "The storm has diminished, but it's still raining." "Yes, I saw. We're already on our way out. Thank you very much for letting us stay." There was a formal tone in her words, an invisible barrier that seemed to separate them, even though they were in the same kitchen, drinking the same coffee. "There's no rush," said James, knowing he was breaking his own rule of not getting involved in his employees' lives. "The streets must still be complicated." Sarah seemed surprised by the offer. "I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, sir." "It's not kindness," he replied quickly. "It's practicality. Besides," he added, looking at Tommy, "I promised a game of chess, if I'm not mistaken." The boy's face immediately lit up. "You remembered." James couldn't help a small smile. "A Reynolds always keeps his promises." That morning passed surprisingly pleasantly. While the rain continued outside, James taught Tommy the basic principles of chess. The boy was perceptive and learned quickly. Sarah, initially tense with the interaction, gradually relaxed upon seeing her son so enthusiastic. "Check," announced Tommy after a sequence of moves, a wide smile lighting up his face. James raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "Very well observed," he praised, moving his king to escape the threat. "You have potential, kid." Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had never seen her boss so human. The cold, distant man she knew was smiling, engaged in a game with her son, as if nothing else mattered in the world. When James's cell phone rang, the magic of the moment broke. His expression changed. Instantly when he looked at the screen. "I need to answer this," he said, standing up. "Keep practicing the moves I taught you." Sarah noticed the change. It was as if a mask had returned to James's face, bringing back the ruthless businessman everyone knew. As he moved away to answer the call, she began to gather the chess pieces. "No, leave them," said Tommy. "He said for me to practice." Sarah hesitated. "Tommy, we can't take advantage. Mr. James has important things to do." But he smiled. "Mom," insisted the boy, "I saw it." Sarah didn't respond. She had also seen it, and that smile, so rare and unexpected, had illuminated James's austere face in a way that made her feel something strange in her chest. Something she shouldn't allow herself to feel. When James returned, his expression was again controlled, but something had subtly changed. He looked at Sarah in a different way, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "The rain has stopped," he announced. "I can ask the driver to take you home if you prefer." Sarah nodded, grateful. "That would be great, thank you." While they waited for the car, Tommy finished organizing the chess pieces on the board with the care of someone handling a treasure. "Can I come back to play another day?" he asked innocently. Sarah's gaze met James's, both caught by surprise by the direct question. "Tommy," began Sarah, "Mr. James is a very busy man and—" "Of course you can," interrupted James to Sarah's astonishment. "Whenever you want to practice, just ask your mother to bring you." Something changed at that moment between the three. A door was opened, though none of them knew exactly where it would lead. In the weeks that followed that storm, something subtle began to change in the routine of the mansion. Sarah noticed that James spent more time at home during her working hours. He, who normally left early for meetings and only returned at night, now frequently worked in his home office. On a Friday afternoon, James surprised Sarah by entering the kitchen while she prepared lunch. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, "I'm thinking of inviting some executives for dinner next week. Do you think you could organize something special?" Sarah looked at him, surprised by the consultation. Normally, James only informed about events through his secretary, with specific and impersonal instructions. "Of course, Mr. James. Any preference for the menu?" He made a vague gesture with his hand. "I trust your judgment. You always—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "You always do everything perfectly." The compliment, so unexpected, made Sarah blush slightly. She lowered her gaze, her green eyes hidden under her light eyelashes, concentrating on the bowl where she was mixing cake batter. "Thank you," she replied simply. James remained in the kitchen, watching her work. There was a gracefulness in Sarah's movements that he had never noticed before. The way she moved through the environment, knowing every corner, every utensil, conveyed a silent confidence. "How is Tommy?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sarah smiled at the mention of her son, a smile that lit up her delicate face. "He's fine. He doesn't stop talking about that chess match. He even asked for a board for his birthday." "When is his birthday?" "Next week, the 15th. James nodded, processing the information. "He'll be 9 years old," completed Sarah. 9 years. The age Emily was when he last saw her. A lump formed in James's throat. "He's a special kid," he said, surprised by the sincerity in his own voice. Very intelligent. The pride in Sarah's look was palpable. Yes, he is. He's always been curious, since he was little. The teachers say he has potential for a scholarship at private schools, but she hesitated, biting her lower lip. But, James encouraged. They're very expensive, even with a partial scholarship, she completed, returning to beat the batter with more vigor. Than necessary. But we'll find a way. We always have. Have you noticed how small comments can reveal so much about the silent struggles people face? If you were in James's place, how would you react upon discovering this reality so different from your own? The silence that followed was laden with unspoken meanings. James observed Sarah's hands, hands that worked tirelessly, that sustained a home, that raised a son alone. "Bring him next week," said James suddenly, "for another chess match. And maybe I'll have a birthday present for him." Sarah raised her gaze, her green eyes shining with surprise. "You don't have to, Mr. James, really." "I know I don't have to," he replied, his tone softer than usual. "I want to." When he left the kitchen, Sarah remained motionless for a few moments, trying to understand what had just happened. The distant and cold boss she knew was, little by little, revealing himself to be a different man, and that scared her more than she would like to admit. The next day, a Saturday, Sarah was finishing an extra cleaning job at her family's house in Brooklyn when she received a message that made her heart race. "I'm at Central Park with Tommy. He mentioned you usually come here on Saturdays." "James." Sarah reread the message several times, confused and concerned. Tommy had stayed with Mrs. Jenkins that day. How had James found him? And why were they together? Grabbing her things hurriedly and explaining the situation to her temporary employers, Sarah headed to the park as quickly as she could. She found them near the lake, Tommy enthusiastically showing James something in a book about astronomy, his blonde hair shining intensely under the afternoon sun. "What's going on here?" asked Sarah, trying to control her tone of voice to avoid showing how shaken she was. James stood up immediately, looking embarrassed. "Sarah, forgive me for not warning you before. I passed by your house to deliver something and found Tommy with your neighbor. She mentioned she wasn't feeling well, so I offered to bring him to the park, since he said you usually come on Saturdays." Tommy looked at his mother, excited. "Mr. James bought this book for me, Mum. It has all the constellations and planets, and he knows a lot about stars." Sarah took a deep breath, divided between the relief of seeing her son well and the discomfort of the unexpected situation. "You should have called me first," she said to James, more firmly than she intended. "You're right," he agreed, surprising her with the admission. "It was impulsive of me. I apologize." The sincere apology disarmed Sarah. James Reynolds, the powerful businessman who commanded hundreds of employees with an iron fist, was apologizing to her, his housekeeper. "It's okay," she said finally, sitting on the bench beside them. "I was just worried." The three spent the afternoon in the park, in a strange but pleasant harmony. James showed Tommy how to identify some constellations that would be visible that night, while Sarah observed them, noticing the genuine connection forming between them. When the sun began to set, James offered to drive them home. In the small two-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, Sarah hesitated before inviting him in. "It's nothing compared to what you're used to," she said, nervous. James looked around the simple but impeccably arranged apartment. Photos of Tommy at different ages decorated the walls. Carefully cultivated plants occupied the windowsills. There was love in every detail. "It's a real home," he said simply, with a note of sadness that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. That night, while Tommy proudly showed his room to James, Sarah prepared a simple coffee. Observing her boss sitting at her dining table, laughing at something Tommy was saying, she felt a confusion of emotions she didn't know how to name. "He likes you," said Sarah later, when she accompanied James to the door after Tommy had gone to sleep. "He doesn't usually open up like This to strangers. James stopped at the doorframe, his blue gaze meeting her green one. He reminds me of how I was at his age. Before everything. Sarah didn't know what to answer. There was a vulnerability in James's look that disconcerted her. "Thank you for the coffee," he said finally, "and for trusting me with Tommy today." When the door closed behind him, Sarah leaned against it, her heart beating fast. Something was happening. Something that wasn't in the plans. Something that shouldn't be happening. The man who had left through her door wasn't just her boss. He was someone who, slowly and silently, was entering her life in a way she had never foreseen. And the scariest part, she didn't know if she wanted to prevent it. On the Thursday following the meeting in the park, Sarah received an unusual call while cleaning the living room of the mansion. It was Jennifer, James's secretary. "Sarah, Mr. James asked me to check if you and your son would be available for dinner at the mansion tomorrow night," said the secretary, her tone revealing some surprise at the unusual request. "He mentioned something about the boy's birthday." Sarah almost dropped the duster she was holding. "A dinner?" "Yes. He asked to reserve the River Café, but then changed his mind and decided it would be better at the mansion. More intimate was the word he used." Sarah's heart accelerated. Intimate. The word hung in the air, loaded with possible meanings. "Tell him we appreciate." "The invitation," Sarah responded carefully. "Tommy will be very happy." When she hung up, Sarah needed to sit down for a moment. What was happening? In the last few weeks, James had transformed from a distant boss into what exactly? There was no name for what was happening between them, or perhaps there was, but Sarah was too afraid to admit it. The next day, the mansion was different. Sarah noticed small details that weren't part of the usual decoration: discreet balloons in the dining room, an elegant cake in the kitchen, and on the study table, a package wrapped in bright blue paper. James arrived home earlier than normal, bringing with him a nervous energy that Sarah had never seen in him before. "Is everything ready for tonight?" he asked, running his hand through his blonde hair in a way that betrayed his anxiety. "Yes, sir," replied Sarah, maintaining the formality that now seemed strangely out of place between them. "Tommy is very excited. He's never had a birthday party like this." Something passed through James's look, a shadow of sadness, perhaps. "He deserves it. All children deserve it." Sarah knew he was thinking of Emily, the distant daughter. In recent days, James had shared fragments of his story: the bitter divorce, the accusations of negligence, the parental alienation that had separated him from the only person who really mattered in his life. "You are a good man, James Reynolds," said Sarah softly, using his full name for the first time. "More than people know." He looked at her, surprised by the declaration and the use of his name. For a moment they were silent, a silence loaded with things unsaid. "Sarah," he began, taking a step towards her, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. "It must be Tommy," she said quickly, relieved and disappointed at the same time by the interruption. Mrs. Jenkins was going to bring him at 6. The dinner was a surreal experience for Sarah. Seated at the dining table where she normally served meals, she was now treated as a guest of honor, along with her son. The private chef James had hired for the occasion served Tommy's favorite dishes, who looked at everything with wide blue eyes of admiration. Have you ever felt that moment when social barriers seem to dissolve and you see someone from a completely different social class simply as a person? How would you handle the mixture of gratitude and discomfort that Sarah was feeling at that moment? "I've never eaten such a delicious lasagna," exclaimed Tommy, making James smile with genuine pleasure. "Wait until you try the dessert," he replied, winking at the boy. "I heard it's the chef's specialty." Sarah observed the interaction between the two with a lump in her throat. James treated Tommy as if he were important. It wasn't condescension or charity, it was an authentic connection, that she could see growing with each encounter. After dinner, James gave his present to Tommy. When the boy tore the wrapping, his blue eyes widened with emotion. It was a professional chessboard with pieces carved in fine wood. "This board belonged to my father," explained James, his voice softening as he spoke. "He taught me to play when I was your age, during our vacations in the Hamptons. Now it's yours." Tommy looked at the gift with reverence. "But it's very valuable. I can't accept it." James knelt to be at the boy's height. "Yes, you can. Do you know why? Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten, that some of the best things in life happen when we stop hiding behind walls we ourselves have built." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. James wasn't just talking to Tommy. It was a message for her too. Later, when Tommy had fallen asleep on the living room sofa after several chess matches, Sarah and James found themselves alone on the porch, overlooking the illuminated garden. "Thank you," she said softly. "You made this day very special for him." James was standing next to her, so close that Sarah could feel the warmth of his body. "You two have brought something back to this house, something I didn't even know was missing." Sarah turned to look at him, her heart beating strongly against her chest. "James, I know," he interrupted gently. "I know this is complicated, that there are 1,000 reasons why it shouldn't be happening. You work for me. We're from different worlds. People will talk." "People always talk," replied Sarah, surprising herself with the courage in her voice. "But the question is, are we willing to listen to them?" James touched her face with delicacy, as if she were made of fine porcelain. "I don't know what's happening to me, Sarah. I only know that when you and Tommy aren't here, this mansion goes back to being just an empty house, and I go back to being just the cold man everyone thinks they know." Under the starry sky of New York, two worlds collided when their lips met in a hesitant kiss, which quickly transformed into something deeper, more true than any contract James had ever signed, any promise Sarah had ever made to herself. When they moved apart, both knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The world out there, with its rules and judgments, waited to test the strength of what had just been born. It didn't take long for the world to discover about James and Sarah. A photo of them holding hands at the Madison Square Mall was enough to awaken the curiosity of the social column. "Real estate magnate and housekeeper. Romance or scandal?" questioned the headline of a gossip magazine that Sarah found at the neighborhood beauty salon. James had insisted that she leave her job as a housekeeper in his house, but Sarah refused. "I don't want to be supported by you," she explained with the determination he so admired. If this evolves, I want it to be between equals, in whatever way possible." They had found a middle ground. Sarah would continue working, but agreed to leave the extra cleaning jobs on weekends, to be able to spend more time with Tommy and now with James. He, in turn, began to appear more often at her modest apartment for simple dinners and game nights with Tommy, away from the curious looks of New York high society. But the world wouldn't leave them in peace for long. On a Tuesday morning, Sarah was organizing the library when the mansion's phone rang. She answered as usual. "Mr. Reynolds' residence." "Who's speaking?" asked a female voice, cold and cutting. "Sarah Wilson. How can I help you?" There was a loaded pause on the other end of the line. "Ah, so you're the famous housekeeper. This is Catherine Reynolds, James's ex-wife. I'd like to speak with him." Sarah's stomach sank. She knew about Catherine, the successful lawyer with platinum blonde hair and icy blue eyes, who had taken half of James's initial fortune and, more painfully, distanced his daughter from him. "Mr. James is in a meeting outside, Ma'am. May I take a message?" A laugh without humor sounded from the other end. "Of course you can, dear. Tell him I need to discuss about Emily, and also tell him that he should be more careful with who he lets answer his phone. You never know what certain people might hear or say." The veiled threat made Sarah grip the phone tightly. "I'll pass the message, ma'am. Have a good day." When she hung up, her hands were trembling. It was the first time she had directly faced James's past, the life he had before her. And for the first time, she felt real fear of what was to come. Have you ever faced someone who tried to diminish or intimidate you just because of your social position? How would you react in Sarah's place, receiving this kind of treatment from James's ex-wife? That night, when she told James about the phone call, he was visibly disturbed. "Catherine never calls unless she wants something," he said, pacing back and forth in the living room. She probably saw the photos and decided she can use this somehow. Sarah sat on the sofa, watching him. She mentioned Emily. His daughter's name made James stop walking. His shoulders dropped slightly. Emily turns 16 next month. For the first time in years, Catherine had suggested that she might spend the weekend with me. "That's wonderful," said Sarah, sincerely happy for the possibility of reconciliation. James sat next to her, taking her hands in his. "But now, Catherine will certainly use our relationship against me. She'll say I'm inappropriate, that I'm creating an inadequate environment for Emily. Because of me," completed Sarah, the painful understanding forming in her chest. "No." James held her face between his hands, his intense blue eyes fixed on her green ones. "Because of her prejudices, the world's, not because of you, never because of you." The next day, when Sarah arrived for work, she found 3 men in suits in the living room. James was with them, his posture tense, his expression closed. It was the James Reynolds that the business world knew, not the man who had opened up to her in the last few weeks. "Sarah," he called formally, "these are my lawyers. We need to talk." The men observed Sarah with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely disguised disapproval. She suddenly felt conscious of her simple uniform, of her position in that house. "Miss Wilson," began the oldest of them, a man with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses, "we are here to discuss a delicate situation that involves you and Mr. Reynolds." "Richard," interrupted James, "I said I would speak with her first, alone." The lawyer made a gesture of disapproval. "James, as your legal counsel for more than 15 years, I must insist on the importance of resolving this quickly. The construction company's stocks have already fallen 3 points since those photos leaked. The board is concerned about the company's image." Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. This was it then, the real world finally knocking at the door of the unlikely fairy tale. They had begun to live. "Excuse me," she said, maintaining her composure despite the lump in her throat. "I'll continue my work while you talk." "Sarah, wait!" called James, but she had already left, gently closing the door behind her. In the kitchen, Sarah leaned against the sink, breathing deeply to contain the tears that threatened to fall. She had always known this would happen, hadn't she? The fairy tale coming to an end when reality imposed itself. The prince returning to his castle, the maid to her place. An hour later, when the lawyers finally left, James found Sarah in the garden, pruning the roses she cared for with such affection. "They want me to end it with you," he said bluntly. "They say it's a public relations disaster, that it will affect the business, the investors, my chance of reconciliation with Emily." Sarah continued working, her eyes fixed on the roses. "And what did you tell them?" "I said that my personal life is not subject to shareholders' approval." She stopped, finally looking at him. "James, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted, approaching, "that it's complicated, that maybe they're right, that we should reconsider." "It's not just about us," said Sarah softly. "It's about Tommy, about Emily, about your work, which is your life." "No," said James with surprising firmness. "My work was my life, because I didn't have a life, Sarah. I had an empty house and a full bank account. The company will survive. The shareholders will get used to it. And as for Emily, His voice faltered slightly. "If she really wants to know me, she'll have to accept my life as it is now. And you are part of it." Sarah felt her heart accelerate with those words, part of his life. It was more than she had ever expected to hear from James Reynolds. "People will talk," she said, repeating what they had said that night in the garden. "They'll say, 'I'm with you for money.'" "Let them talk," he replied, taking her hands in his, not caring that they were dirty with soil. "We know the truth." Before they could continue the conversation, James's cell phone rang. It was Jennifer, his secretary. "Mr. James," she said, her voice tense even through the speaker. "Mrs. Catherine is here at the company with Emily. She's demanding to speak with you immediately about the situation with your employee." James and Sarah exchanged concerned looks. The confrontation they both feared had arrived sooner than they expected. "Tell her I'll be there in 30 minutes, replied James, hanging up afterward. For a moment they were silent, the weight of what was to come hanging between them. "Go," said Sarah finally. "You need to talk to your daughter." James hesitated. "Come with me." Sarah widened her eyes. "That would only make things worse. Catherine would use my presence against you." "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe it's time to show everyone that we're not doing anything wrong, that we have nothing to hide." That afternoon, when James Reynolds entered his own office with Sarah Wilson at his side, the immediate buzz among the employees was like a wave spreading through the corridors of Reynolds Construction. Sarah kept her head high, despite the curious looks and barely disguised whispers. James held her hand firmly, as if transmitting a clear message to everyone. She was there as his equal, not as his subordinate. In the meeting room, Catherine waited with Emily, a teenager with golden blonde hair and blue eyes identical to her father's, who looked at the floor with visible discomfort. "What is this, James?" Catherine fired upon seeing Sarah. "Brought your friend to a family meeting." James maintained his calm, his eyes fixed on the daughter he barely recognized. "Emily," he said softly, ignoring his ex-wife, "it's good to see you. You've grown so much." The girl briefly raised her eyes, studying her father with an expression difficult to read. Her gaze shifted to Sarah, evident curiosity in her young face. "James, we need to talk in private," insisted Catherine, "about the influence that certain situations can have on our daughter." Sarah felt the grip on James's hand intensify. "Sarah stays," he said firmly. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." What followed was a painful hour where Catherine exposed all her concerns, from the impropriety of the relationship to the supposed impact on the company's image and consequently on the patrimony that would one day be Emily's. During the entire time, Sarah remained silent, observing with growing admiration how James responded with calm and dignity, without ever raising his voice or losing his composure. And more surprisingly, she noticed how Emily observed her father, not with the contempt or indifference that Catherine seemed to expect, but with something that resembled a re-evaluation. When Catherine finally exhausted her arguments, it was Emily who spoke for the first time. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant but firm, "are you happy?" The question, so simple and direct, caught everyone by surprise. James looked at Sarah before answering, a small smile appearing on his lips. "Yes, Emily, for the first time in a long time." The teenager nodded, absorbing the information. "You never smiled like that before. In the photos that came out on the internet, you're smiling." Catherine seemed shocked by the direction the conversation had taken. "Emily, you don't understand what's happening here." "Yes, I do." "Mom," replied the girl with surprising maturity. "Dad found someone who makes him smile." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, moved by the simplicity and wisdom in the young woman's words. "I still want to spend my birthday with you," said Emily to her father. "And maybe I could meet her son, that chess boy you mentioned in your messages." James seemed unable to speak, his emotion evident to everyone in the room. It was Sarah who answered. "Tommy would be very happy to meet you. Emily, he's always wanted an older sister." When they left the building that afternoon, Sarah and James knew that the battle was far from over. There would be more obstacles, more looks of disapproval, more questions about the legitimacy of their relationship. But something fundamental had changed. Emily, the most important person in James's life, had taken the first step toward acceptance. In the car, James remained silent for several minutes, processing what had happened. "She called me Dad," he finally said, his voice choked. "After so many years." Sarah held his hand. "Children see what adults often ignore, the simple truth behind the complications we create." James turned to look at her, as if seeing her in a new light. "How could I be so lucky? Among all the wrong choices I made in life, how could I get it so completely right in finding you?" "It wasn't luck," replied Sarah. "It was a storm." 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the office. Life had found a new rhythm. For James, Sarah, and the children, because now they were really a family, albeit an unconventional one. Emily spent alternate weekends with her father, initially with reluctance, then with growing enthusiasm, especially when Tommy was present. The age difference didn't prevent the two from developing a sibling relationship, with Emily teaching Tommy about music and art, and the boy sharing his passion for astronomy and chess. Sarah continued working, but no longer as a housekeeper. James had insisted that she resume the studies she had abandoned when she became pregnant with Tommy, and now she was studying business administration at college, while working part-time as an administrative assistant at the charitable foundation of Reynolds Construction. The transition hadn't been easy. The company directors had demanded an extraordinary meeting to discuss the reputational risks of the CEO's relationship with a former employee. Some shareholders threatened to withdraw their investments. Old friends from New York high society stopped inviting James to events, but for every door that closed, other unexpected ones opened. The story of the powerful businessman who found love with a housekeeper had captured the public's imagination in a way no one had foreseen. A special report in Time magazine, titled "Beyond Appearances," the romance that defied prejudices, had presented a side of James Reynolds that few knew, the man who had grown up in simple conditions in upstate New York before building his real estate empire. Do you believe that love can really overcome such deep social barriers in our society? Is what James and Sarah risked worth it for what they built together? On a sunny Sunday afternoon in Central Park, James watched Sarah, Tommy, and Emily riding bicycles around the lake. The sun reflected on the golden hair of all three, creating an almost ethereal image that brought a happiness he had never imagined possible. "Mr. Reynolds?" James turned upon. Hearing his name, a middle-aged man approached, extending his hand. "Robert Johnson. I'm Tommy's teacher at the public school." James shook the man's hand, surprised. "Pleasure to meet you. Excuse the intrusion, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you personally for what you've been doing. The scholarship program you implemented in New York's public schools, it's making a real difference." James smiled, genuinely satisfied. Since meeting Tommy and seeing his potential limited by lack of resources, he had transformed his company's social responsibility policy, creating a comprehensive program of scholarships and mentorship for talented children from public schools. "Tommy inspired me," admitted James. "He showed me how many talents we're wasting due to lack of opportunities." The teacher nodded. "Well, as an educator for 20 years, I can say that few initiatives have had such an immediate impact. And if I may be sincere, it caused a very different impression from Detty. What we had of you." James raised his eyebrows. "And what impression was that?" The man seemed embarrassed. "That of a businessman focused only on results and profits." But you proved to be much more than that." When the teacher walked away, James reflected on how his life had completely changed in less than a year. The man he had been, isolated in his mansion, hidden behind contracts and business meetings, now seemed like a stranger. Sarah approached, leaving the children to continue their bike ride. "Who was that?" she asked, sitting beside him on the bench, her blonde hair shining intensely under the afternoon sun. "Tommy's teacher. He came to thank me for the scholarship program." Sarah smiled, taking James's hand in hers. "See? You're making a difference in a way you never imagined." James intertwined his fingers with hers, admiring how their hands, one calloused from years of hard work, the other marked by pens from million-dollar contracts, fit perfectly together. "No, Sarah, we are making a difference. Together." The sun was beginning to set over New York, casting golden tones on the park's lake. Emily and Tommy were returning on their bicycles, laughing at some shared joke, the blonde hair of both shining like liquid gold against the evening light. "Home?" asked Sarah, watching the children approach. James nodded, but then hesitated. "Actually, I have something to ask you before." Sarah looked at him, curious, as James stood up from the bench and, to her complete surprise, knelt in front of her. "James, what are you doing?" she whispered, looking around, embarrassed by the curious looks from people in the park. "Something I should have done months ago," he replied, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sarah Wilson, you've transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You've taught me about courage, humility, and the true meaning of family." Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, tears beginning to form in her bright green eyes. "Would you accept me as your husband, not just in the good days, but also in the difficult ones? Not just when the world approves, but especially when it disapproves? Would you give me the honor of building a life together as equals, united by the only title that really matters? Love." At that moment, Emily and Tommy had arrived, watching the scene with huge smiles. It was evident they knew about the plan. Sarah looked at the two children, the girl who was slowly learning to trust again, the boy who had never stopped dreaming, and then at the man kneeling before her who had risked everything for something as simple and as complex as love. "Yes," she answered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, James Reynolds, I accept." As the sun set over the city that had witnessed the unlikely meeting between two seemingly irreconcilable worlds, James and Sarah sealed their commitment with a kiss that represented not just the union of two people, but proof that when true, love recognizes no barriers of class, social prejudices, or established conventions. Tommy and Emily approached, enveloping the adults in a collective embrace that symbolized what they had become. A family built not by obligation or convention, but by choice. "So now we're officially a family?" asked Tommy, his blue eyes shining with hope. "We always have been," replied James, affectionately messing up the boy's blonde hair. "Since that stormy night that changed everything." Sarah looked at the three faces that now formed her world. "Family isn't defined by last name or blood," she said softly. "It's defined by the love we choose to give each other, every day." As they walked together to the car, leaving behind the curious looks and whispers of passers-by, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the girl who grew up in Brooklyn dreaming of a better future, to the woman who had found not just security and comfort, but a love that had defied all odds. James, for his part, observed the woman he had chosen as his life partner and the two children who had brought light back to his days. All the fortune he had accumulated over the years didn't compare to the wealth he now possessed. A family built on the most solid of foundations, mutual respect, genuine acceptance, and the courage to choose love, even when the whole world seemed to doubt. And as the New York sky filled with stars, 4 hearts beat in sync, united by an unexpected storm that had washed away the barriers between two seemingly distant worlds, revealing the simple truth that many take a lifetime to discover, that in the end, we are all just people seeking the same thing: a place to belong, someone to love, and the courage to choose happiness, no matter where it comes from. 1 year after the marriage proposal in Central Park, the chapel of Rainbow Falls Ranch, a property recently acquired by James in the outskirts of Westchester County, was decorated with dozens of arrangements of white and lilac roses. The day had dawned with an intensely blue sky, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate the union that had defied all probabilities. "Are you nervous?" asked Emily, now 17, as she adjusted the veil in Sarah's carefully arranged blonde hair. Sarah took a deep breath, looking at herself in the mirror. The ivory satin dress, elegant in its simplicity, highlighted her green eyes, today brighter than ever. "Curiously, no," she replied with a serene smile. "I've never been so certain of anything in my life." Emily smiled, a smile so similar to her father's that it sometimes surprised Sarah. In the last few months, the teenager had transformed from a reserved and distrustful young woman into an unexpected ally. It was she who defended her father's relationship when some more conservative relatives raised objections, and it was she who helped organize every detail of the ceremony. "You deserve this," said Emily, with the maturity that always impressed Sarah. "I've never seen my father so happy. It's as if he's come back to life." In the room next door, James adjusted his tie while Tommy, formal in his navy blue suit, watched with admiration. "Do you think one day I'll be as tall as you?" asked the boy, who was already showing signs that he would inherit his mother's elegant physical structure. James smiled, bending down to be at the boy's height. "It doesn't matter how tall you grow, Tommy. What matters is the size of your heart, and yours is already enormous." Tommy hugged him impulsively, his blonde hair shining under the light coming through the window. "I'm happy that you're going to be my real dad now." James felt a lump in his throat. In the last few months, he had discreetly initiated the process of adopting Tommy. They were papers that changed little in practice. He already loved the boy as a son, but that symbolized the commitment he was making not just to Sarah, but to the family they were building. The small chapel was full, not with New York high society that James used to frequent, but with people who really mattered. The mansion's longest-serving employees, including Mrs. Wilson, who cried with emotion, the new friends Sarah had made in college, some school friends of Tommy and Emily, teacher Robert Johnson, who now coordinated the scholarship program of the Reynolds Foundation, and even some company directors who, initially skeptical, had been won over by James's determination and Sarah's dignity. When the wedding march began to play and Sarah entered arm in arm with Tommy, her choice to walk her down the aisle, James felt as if time stopped. Under the light coming through the colored stained glass windows, she looked like an ethereal vision, with her golden hair forming a luminous halo around her face. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she reached his side. "And you look nervous," replied Sarah with a mischievous smile. "Just amazed at my luck." The celebrant, a justice of the peace who was a friend of James, conducted the ceremony with words about bridges built between different worlds and about love as a transformative force. When the time came for the vows, James surprised everyone by speaking without notes, his words flowing directly from the heart. "Sarah, before you, I lived in a prison that I built myself with walls of pride and hurt. You not only entered that prison during a storm, but showed me that the doors were never really locked. I promise to spend every day of our life trying to be worthy of the freedom you've given me." Sarah, with tears in her green eyes, responded with equal sincerity. "James, I learned from you that our story isn't defined by where we start, but by the choices we make each day. I choose you today, and I will choose you every day, not because you complete me, but because together we are stronger, truer, and braver than we would ever be apart. 6 months after the wedding, the Reynolds Foundation inaugurated its first educational center in Brooklyn. The modern and luminous building, designed by the best architects of the construction company, offered full scholarships and a mentorship program for talented young people from low-income families. On the day of the inauguration, journalists gathered to photograph the couple who by this time had become a kind of symbol of breaking social barriers. James, in his impeccable suit, and Sarah, elegant in a sky-blue dress that enhanced her green eyes, cut the inaugural ribbon together. "This center wouldn't have existed without Sarah," said James during his speech. "It was she who taught me to look beyond appearances and see the potential that exists in each person." Later, when the guests had already left and only the family remained, Tommy ran through the wide corridors of the new center, his blonde hair reflecting the sunlight coming through the windows. "Can I study here too?" he asked enthusiastically. Sarah exchanged a look with James. "Actually, we have a surprise for you," she said, leading her son to a door at the end of the corridor. When the door opened, Tommy saw a room dedicated exclusively to chess, with several professional boards and a specialized library. On the wall, a golden plaque announced, "Tommy Wilson Reynolds Chess and Strategy Center." The boy was speechless, his blue eyes wide with surprise. "This center isn't just about academic opportunities," explained James, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's about discovering talents in all areas. And you, my son, have a special talent that deserves to be cultivated." Emily, who was watching the scene leaning on the doorframe, smiled at her brother's evident joy. In the last few months, she had surprised everyone by expressing interest in administration and social management, following in her father's footsteps at the foundation. Now, about to enter college, she was already talking about expanding the project to other cities. That night, back at the house they now shared, a spacious residence in the village, neither as grand as James's old mansion, nor as modest as Sarah's old apartment, a middle ground that symbolized the new path they were building together. The couple watched the children playing chess on the porch. "We did it, didn't we?" asked Sarah, her blonde hair swaying gently with the night breeze. "Built something real from something so unlikely." James embraced her from behind, inhaling the soft perfume that had become his favorite scent in the world. "Not only did we do it," he replied, "I think we found something that many people spend their whole lives looking for and never find." "And what would that be?" "A home," he replied simply. "Not a place, not these walls or this address, but this feeling of finally being where I should be." Sarah turned to look at him, losing herself for a moment in the intense blue of his eyes that now rarely showed the coldness of before. Who would have thought? James Reynolds, a romantic. "Only with you," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that, like the first, still carried the same electricity, the same certainty, the same unquestionable truth, that love, when authentic, recognizes no barriers, doesn't bow to prejudices, and has the power to transform not just two lives, but an entire world around them. In the following spring, when the apple trees on the ranch were laden with blossoms, the family received unexpected news. Sarah was pregnant. The news was received with joy by everyone, especially Tommy, who couldn't contain his happiness at the idea of having a little brother or sister. "I hope it's a girl," he said one night as they all dined on the porch. "We already have almost a chess team. Emily is the queen, James is the king, I'm the bishop, and the baby can be the knight." Everyone laughed at the analogy, but James noticed that Sarah had suddenly become thoughtful. "What is it?" he asked softly when the children moved away. "I was thinking about names," she replied. "If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Hope." James smiled, understanding the meaning behind the choice. "And if it's a boy?" Sarah looked at Tommy, who was now showing Emily a new chess move he had learned, his blue eyes shining with enthusiasm. "David," she said. "It was my father's name. He died when I was Tommy's age. He worked as a mason on the Bailey construction sites." James frowned, surprised. "Bailey? The construction company I bought 10 years ago?" Sarah nodded. "The world comes full circle, doesn't it? My father helped build the empire you now command, and here we are, building something new together." James kissed her softly, amazed once again by the way destiny had intertwined their paths in ways neither of them could have predicted. When the baby was born, on a sunny October morning, it was a girl with hair as golden as her mother's and eyes as deeply blue as her father's. They called her Hope, not just as a name, but as a symbol of what their union represented to all who knew their story. In the years that followed, the Reynolds Foundation expanded to other cities, becoming one of the most respected social initiatives in the United States. Tommy, following in his mother's footsteps, graduated in business administration, but maintained his passion for chess, even competing internationally. Emily, combining her father's determination with the social sensitivity acquired from Sarah, took over the direction of the foundation, implementing innovative programs that received worldwide recognition. As for James and Sarah, they continued to build their story day by day, living proof that when two people choose to see beyond appearances and prejudices, when they choose courage instead of fear, when they choose love instead of convention, there is no barrier that cannot be overcome, no distance between worlds that cannot be traveled. And it all began on a stormy night, when a door opened, literally and figuratively, forever changing the course of two lives that, despite being so different, were destined to meet and complete each other.